there's a lot going on in the world, aside from electoral politics, the war in Ukraine, and the deplorable behavior of the Republicans yesterday in the hearings of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, excuse me. And at the top of the list of things that I'm concerned about is the Iran nuclear deal. This thing that Donald Trump just completely sabotaged, much to the detriment, in my opinion, of both Iran and the world. So I wanted to find out where we're at on that. Jamal Abdi is with us. He's the president of NIAC, the National Iranian American Council, the website NIAC Council, or NIACouncil.org, and his Twitter handle, NIA Council, or J Abdi, A-B-D-I. Jamal, welcome back to the program. So where are we at with this? What's going on?
We are on the precipice of an agreement. There's one issue that remains between the U.S. and Iran to get us all back into the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. This is after, the better part of the past year of negotiations and fits and starts to return the U.S. to compliance and return Iran back into compliance as well, because Iran, of course, began abandoning some of the commitments under the JCPOA to rein in its nuclear program after Donald Trump left the agreement. So where we are now is that there was a hiccup a couple of weeks ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. And ironically, it was actually Republicans and folks opposed to diplomacy here in Washington who started to say very, superficially and just complete nonsense, political talking point that because Russia is part of the UN Security Council and it was the UN Security Council members plus Germany negotiating the deal, the original JCPOA and the return of the JCPOA, that somehow this was Putin's deal. And any diplomacy that Russia was involved in necessarily meant that it was Vladimir Putin in charge of it. And so Biden was not just negotiating with the evil mullahs in Iran, but also the evil Kremlin regime. That then, I don't know if Russia got the idea from this or if it was already in the cards, but the hiccup was that Russia then said, you know what, actually, we have additional demands as part of these negotiations because we want to ensure that the sanctions being imposed on Russia do not prevent us from enjoying the benefits of this nuclear agreement where Iran is supposed to be reintegrated with the global economy. And so there were delays there. It was overcome. The Russians and the Iranians reached a agreement that Russia was going to back down from these additional demands. And so we thought we were at the finish line. Then lo and behold, there is one remaining issue in order to get this deal signed where the Iranian side and the U.S. side cannot come to an agreement. And it is over the issue of sanctions imposed by Donald Trump for no reason other than to frustrate the ability of any future administration from being able to restore the nuclear deal or enter into diplomacy with Iran. So Trump imposed these sanctions knowing that and saying publicly, these are being put in place to try to prevent future administrations from getting a deal with Iran. And yet now we're in this position where apparently the Biden administration is having doubts about how this is going to play politically in the United States and has fears that by lifting some of these sanctions, which are, ostensibly for terrorism and other actions that are going to be portrayed really badly politically here in Washington. But now Biden is actually seemingly playing into the hands of the Trump administration and saying, you know what, the political costs here may be too great. So we're not sure we want to lift these sanctions and we need something better from Iran in order to do so. And so that's where things lie right now. They're negotiating how to remove Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps from the U.S. Foreign Terrorist Organization list, which is a terrorism list not reserved for state actors, but for the first time was applied to Iran's Revolutionary Guard, which functions as its military and a big player also within its economy. And so now, in order to take off these completely symbolic sanctions, the Biden administration wants Iran to make some commitment to de-escalate in the region, which I think would be a great achievement. But if this is where the nuclear deal dies, to have come this far, have gotten through all of the hurdles that were in place to deal with a new Iranian administration coming in midway through the talks, to deal with the Russian obstruction, and to now have it die at this point would just be a complete tragedy. And so I'm still hopeful that there's going to be a resolution, but we are now in the middle of Iran's biggest holiday of the year, the New Year, Nowruz. And so the talks are stalled as we wait for the two sides to try to broker an agreement around this terrorism designation.
So, Jamal, you didn't say this. I'm imagining it, but tell me if my imagination is close to what the Biden administration is afraid of. In order to get to where we need to go, the Biden administration does away with the sanctions on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that Trump put into place. Immediately, Republicans start squealing that Biden is essentially saying, okay, Iran, go ahead and attack Israel, or go ahead and attack your other neighbors in the region. Saudi Arabia also, has a dog in this fight. And it will get demagogued, even though the sanctions were largely meaningless. It'll get demagogued to the point that the political harm to the Biden administration and to America generally is so great that it's not worth the deal. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That is the political context we're now dealing with, and Republicans are already saying this, and even some Democrats
really
who are backed by AIPAC or AIPAC's AIPAC formed this progressive organization to try to claw back some of the support they lost from Democrats when they went after Obama during the first nuclear deal. But yes, this is the main political debate right now. Republicans and some Democrats saying, don't lift this foreign terrorist organization sanction on IRGC. It's completely the wrong message, and obviously, misstating the facts. The fact is, the Revolutionary Guard will still be designated as a SDGT, a specially designated global terrorist group, which is how you deal with state actors.
Right.
So there's no practical implications for this. It's completely symbolic, and yet this is exactly where the concern is, that this is going to be demagogued, and not just Republicans and opponents will use this to weaken public support for the deal. But then if there is some flashpoint, if there is an attack that in Iraq that is linked to the IRGC, or anything that happens in the region that is linked to the IRGC, then would be laid at the foot of the Biden administration. See, this is your fault because you took them off the terrorist list. Notwithstanding the fact that the IRGC has completely escalated under the Trump sanctions and under the maximum pressure. So the actual, what's actually happening on the ground is completely divorced from this political debate.
I would assume that it would be in the interest of to broaden this out beyond just Israel, because Iran has another big enemy with Saudi Arabia and some of the other countries in the region. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. That the way I guess my question would be, wouldn't it be in the best interest of all of those anti-Iran countries for Iran to stop building nuclear weapons? What am I missing here? Why would the threat of those countries blaming Biden for being soft or whatever? Why is that a potent threat?
Look, this is all kabuki theater. We're not talking about what these.
So it's not a potent threat of Israel blaming us or of Saudi Arabia blaming us. It's a potent threat of some Republican who's trying to get into the White House blaming Biden specifically.
Well, so it's that. It is also the regional partners of the United States putting pressure on the Biden administration, and I do think it's important to note Saudi Arabia and Iran. You look at the tensions in the region and the attacks that have happened. Getting Iran and Saudi Arabia to the negotiating table to talk about regional de-escalation would be a coup. Like, this is exactly where we wanted things to go. And this is if there is a JCPOA, those talks will recommence. So this actually paves the path for that. The problem here is not that Israel or the Saudis are truly concerned, I don't think, about, they don't want a nuclear Iran, obviously, But a lot of the opposition to this deal that the entire, the Israeli security establishment all has been coming out and saying it was a horrible mistake for Netanyahu to push Trump to exit the deal. We're now in such a worse security position. But the reason that all of these states are opposed to this is not because of the nuclear deal. It's not because of the regional stuff. There's a fear that the United States is going to broker an agreement with Iran that begins to bring Iran in from the shadows and enables the United States to begin to leave the region and leave it to the actors within the region to sort through these issues. And there's a fear that on the Israeli and the Saudi side that they would be abandoned by the U.S. and actually have to deal with Iran as peers rather than under the protection of the United States. Is that a legitimate fear? It's a legitimate fear if these governments do not want to make concessions on legitimate issues and actually strike deals so that they can live in the same neighborhood together. They are clinging to the status quo that is untenable, that is under the U.S. shield, that enables this authoritarianism, and so this now needs to come to a head. And I think there's a aversion to any sort of change on those grounds and just not the political will to embark on that. Right. It's changed a little under Trump, though, because Trump demonstrated that the U.S. will go into the, will do occasional, military action and things like that. But when it came close to actually, a real military confrontation with Iran, Trump did back down and sent a signal, I think, to particularly the Persian Gulf states that, the U.S. is not going to fight this war for you. So you may need to start acting as responsible actors and dealing with some of these issues through diplomatic engagement with Iran if you don't want to be fighting that war.
Are we seeing evidence of that?
Well, that's I think why we have these Saudi-Iran talks that started last year and have been paused while the JCPOA talks continue, and which will restart after there is a deal. Fascinating stuff. I know a lot now that I didn't know before. Jamal Abdi, president of NIAC, the National Iranian American Council, NIACouncil.org, J. Abdi or NIA Council on Twitter.